Hi guys, welcome to the High Man podcast. Today is Thursday, 22nd of September, 17:41 p.m. Well, obviously. Welcome. How you doing, Pete?
I'm pretty good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. Enjoying the terrible weather, but
Yeah, it's getting bad now, isn't it?
yeah, a little bit colder.
But anyway, back to the more important topics. So in today's
Yes.
episode, we'll be talking about. We're going to start off with talking about the monarchy, because obviously recent events. It's got a lot of conversation going about it, uh, and yeah, I'll just get straight into talking about it. So I noticed a lot there's a lot of people with the opinion that that now the Queen's died, that the monarchy should be abolished because it's outdated, and this sort of made me ask the question to myself, because that point of view makes some sense to me. It does seem somewhat outdated, but I did ask myself the question: what impact does getting rid of cultural traditions have, even if they seem updated? Is there something fundamental and important about cultural traditions, even if they might seem outdated in some ways? Is there greater consequences to dispensing them? I'll let you go with whatever you think to start on that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people kind of want to get rid of the monarchy because they think the monarchy kind of takes up possibly like a lot of money, which is fair. Like taxpayers pay a lot of money that they would hope would go to causes that directly benefit them. But then it gets into the question: if you want to abolish the monarchy, like what other traditions are we willing to take away? Like you could argue quite a secular society nowadays in the UK. Are we going to like take away like Christmas traditions, like Easter? Um, it's just a difficult one because a lot of people say the monarchy, they like expense all of their things to the taxpayer, and we have to pay for like building works on all of their houses and stuff like that, the security that they have, but also like what money comes in through tourism to local businesses in the
Mm.
like London area, and like obviously if people are going to London to see Buckingham Palace or like if there's a Queen's like official event, they might end up like venturing out to different places in the UK, bringing businesses more money in those local areas, which helps them directly.
Yeah, there's definitely a very
So no, I haven't really.
I'm sorry.
So yeah, I haven't really researched like all the numbers on it. I guess it might be quite a difficult thing to calculate because it's like, how do you even like start like measuring what money comes in from them and not?
Yeah, there's a very like practical sort of economic element um, to the problem where you talk about, like, okay, it's the money that they bring in more than the expenses of the taxpayers, and you can argue how much benefit that has. But there's certainly an argument and debate to be had there. But I do somewhat feel like the greater debate is more about maybe maybe it's motivated by economic thing, but the argument for abolishing it might even be more so that like it's more of a cultural argument where it's outdated, and that obviously there's no longer a need for the monarchy because we don't function as a monarchy politically. So it's just basically simply there out of tradition. I don't know about the specifics of how much power the royal family actually has, but
I think it's
but
more
very
so
little.
symbolic nowadays.
Sorry.
It's more so symbolic. Like you have to have the. I think when bills get passed, I think it's something. It's called something along the lines of like royal assent, where the Queen has to sign off every single bill that goes through Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that won't. Sometimes that won't go through like exactly through by. Sometimes that won't get signed exactly by the Queen. Like they might have a representative of the Queen that signs it, but they still are the Queen. I think they have a weekly meeting, or the head of state of the monarchy. They have a weekly meeting with the Prime Minister, and they kind of talk through the issues that are like facing the country at hand.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, one thing I was very surprised about that, especially from like people like our peers that are quite young. it surprised me how many like people kind of gathered around together and were kind of a bit sorrowful about the Queen dying. And it was nice having this like matriarchal figure that all of the country can kind of gather around and be like, oh, this represents who we are. Or, like seems to be in the news represented as a lovely old woman that everybody shouldn't have a problem with if they actually met her on a one-to-one basis. And all of the country seemed to come together and mourn together almost. And it was kind of nice. It just gives everyone the opportunity to have that connection on like a communal basis.
Yeah, there's definitely there's like for a lot of people, it's definitely a big sign of respect and almost like a gathering of people obviously they're mourning the death of someone, but yeah, you could argue to some degree it's a positive thing for these people to be like gathering and connecting with each other and like celebrating the life of the Queen, who I guess represents something to the country and to the people. But yeah, it's with because with discarding like getting rid of the monarchy, and when I was thinking about the question of traditions, another related thing that came up was like I remember Jordan Peterson talking about marriage, how a lot of people kind of nowadays don't really like. Again, it's maybe even more of a symbolic thing to get married now, and people feel as people are less religious now, like marriage isn't as essential to as like a symbolic bond between people. But and a lot of people say, oh, we would just won't get married. But then Jordan Peterson's sort of said like, okay, well, like what? Okay, it's understandable that you might not think it's valuable, but like what are you replacing it with? You're just dispensing with a tradition, and perhaps if you do that too much, then there is a consequence to losing the traditions of a culture, and yeah, it's a difficult problem. But
yeah, I guess when you take away a tradition, there's almost a void, and does that void on a regular does that void necessarily always have to be filled by something else? Like in my eyes, it kind of would. Like, how do you dispense of one thing without filling that gap with another?
Yeah,
and it kind of comes down to the argument of like marriage as a tradition. Like we all know like the benefits of it if it goes well. We all know the drawbacks of it if it kind of goes a bit sideways. But we don't know the benefits and the drawbacks of the possible thing that could replace it.
mm-hmm.
And it's kind of almost safer to put your bets on the absolute knowns rather than the unknown like dangers, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. But maybe that's kind of the fundamental argument between tradition versus like innovation and new things. Like you will always need new things because the world's changing, and yeah, we need to adapt and develop and evolve. However, most new shit, like the tried and tested method of things, is will usually be better than the new thing, because there might be 100 new things that people suggest and only one of them brings a positive impact, because you don't know, because you can't know. And that's kind of the dynamic between, like, I guess that's the dynamic between progressives and conservatives. Conservatives would argue like we need to conserve the structure that has gotten us so far, and progressives say we need to evolve and adapt and dispense with what is no longer serving us, which some people would argue the monarchy is no longer serving us, in favor of moving forward. But perhaps when the argument is to do something like abolish the monarchy, you need to ask, okay, you're abolishing the monarchy, you don't think it's useful anymore, but But like, is all you're doing there just detracting from the world? Like, is there anything to replace that? Is a loss of tradition?
Yeah.
And
When
yeah,
when people ask the question, when people ask the question, oh, how useful is the monarchy? I feel like when people say that, I used to say it as well. Like, they're not really asking the question, how useful is the monarchy? They're just kind of putting a blanket statement out there, saying, like, and hoping that people will subscribe to the idea that the monarchy is just an outdated system that's built on the like class oppression, but they're not really kind of analysing what does a monarchy bring to the country.
mm,
And I'm not too sure exactly what every single benefit is, but I think it's very important to have that. I think it's important to have that non-political figurehead of the state, because no matter which party's in power, if it's Boris Johnson, if it's Keir Starmer, if it's Ed Miliband or whoever, we're always going to have a king or a queen that the whole country can follow and kind of direct their lives with.
mm,
But then I
yeah,
guess the person that we will follow and direct our lives with, if we believe in the monarchy, they're not elected and they're only there by birthright. Like how just and how justifiable is that?
yeah. It's obvious. It's obvious that you can see that the unfairness there. But does that, whether that makes it completely unjust, I don't know with the birthright thing. But another part of this is about like patriotism. I think in the Western world we have kind of lost patriotism. I think patriotism is often seen as being like, if you're patriotic, then some people would even say like you're racist, and
Yeah,
like to love your country is seen as a bad thing, as and I don't think, yeah, I think on average probably most people in the Western world don't love their countries anymore, because there's a massive attack on traditions, and yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because obviously you can see the traditions are outdated, and then people make arguments about, okay, how can we be patriotic as being a British person after the bad shit like the British Empire did in the past? But maybe that's only seeing one side of the argument. I think we've mentioned before the dynamic between like the complete archetypal picture would be the wise king, and then the tyrant. They're like the two sides of culture, which can be positive and negative. And to throw away the wise king and everything that culture has brought us, out of criticisms of the tyrannical element and
yeah,
corruption that is within it. I don't know. I think it's missing a side of the picture, and you're certainly losing something there. Whether you're just in dispensing it due to the tyrannical element, there's an argument to be had there, but it's certainly not a black and white argument.
no, no. Like it's easy to kind of throw shade on like the countries that are in power on a global scale. Like, it's easy to say, "Oh, the British Empire was terrible," and I could agree. I'm sure most people could. It was like it's terrible that any country will like colonize another and take over like their land and like make slaves of the people that are native to the country. But it's also like forgetting the fact that, like, this might sound a bit weird, but it's kind of it's easy to agree with that, but it's harder to realize that that could be any country. Most people will say, "Oh, that's the British Empire." It's not necessarily just the British Empire. Like, there's been empires throughout history that have done exactly the same.
Yeah.
The British Empire might have been the most successful and the most recent, but go back like hundreds of years, you'll have the Mongolian Empire that was like just an absolute force to be reckoned with. But we don't like throw shade at Mongolia now today because they're a country on a much smaller scale than their empire.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to identify the tyrant with the like I don't know, it's easy to like identify the tyrant with like the person that's actually doing it, but every single country is the tyrant. It's just that some countries have the ability to do it and might actually do it rather than others, which
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily make it right, but
Yeah, it's like a universal thing across the world. It's not like there's probably not a country you can find that hasn't, that if you look back however long, that hasn't committed like crimes against humanity. Um, so yeah, but that what you were saying there made me think about how like we have this discussion about culture, but I think me and you are we both very strongly believe about like the responsibility being on the individual, not on a collective group. And I sort of had that thought when you were saying, oh, people criticize cultures of the past for the atrocities and somehow try to put those sins upon the current like population, when in
yeah,
reality the population is a population of individuals that had nothing to do with those historic things. But then that also had me thinking it goes both ways, doesn't it? So the individuals haven't they weren't directly involved in any of the atrocities of the past, but they also weren't directly involved in the in like the good things that happened in the past. So is yeah, I don't know. It's a weird dynamic there. Like, how much should we value? Like, is this conversation about culture kind of almost irrelevant because always comes back to the individual? Like, how much value does a conversation about culture have versus about the individual?
yeah. Like, does the culture's norms impact an individual more, or is an individual's perspective more important? Like, I remember I was in Ireland over summer, and I was at my aunt's house, and we were talking about various things, and then we ended up talking about like the Troubles a little bit. And it was something like we were talking about. There's a in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, there's a thing called the Day of Orange, or Orange Day, and it's where all like the Protestants basically have like an Orange Day march, and they all wear orange, and it celebrates William. I think it's William of Orange. I think his name was. It celebrates him coming to Northern Ireland and kind of conquering it and conquering the land. And she was saying to me that she wonders how much impact that has on the psyche of all like the Catholic Irish people that live in Northern Ireland. Like in my eyes, I was thinking it's a parade that people celebrate for their own like tradition. Why should that kind of have an impact on an individual that doesn't want to take part in that celebration? But she kind of seems to think, well, she didn't seem to think she'd want to like understand and explore what impact that does have on the individual psyche of like a person that opposes that celebration.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess culture, like I kind of disregard it, but I think culture does have a lasting impact. But like you were saying, how do you find the oppressor in the culture nowadays for the crimes of people in the past?
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's difficult because yeah, culture absolutely will have an effect on people's values. And I mean, we talk about like the higher man versus the herd. I guess what the herd is perhaps you could say the herd is the popular opinion of the culture, like whatever that is what people um, the herd would believe. And I'll just give a bit of context on the herd because maybe people haven't heard the other episodes, but basically it's an idea from Nietzsche that the herd are people who are generally socially conformist, whereas the high man is, which is what the podcast name is based on, is people who consider their own values. So perhaps the majority of the culture and even any individual, because we had this conversation in one of the episodes about individual versus collectivist values.
Yeah,
And obviously we're both very like individual orientated, but that is like what the Western world is kind of what bases their things upon. If we were both born in China, we would put the but sort of the collectivist values.
Collective group. Yeah.
But so yeah, culture definitely has an impact. And I think
I guess it could only have an impact to the extent that an individual lets it have an impact. Which kind of gets into what you're saying about the higher man. If you choose to create your own values and your own perspective, is only determined by what you believe rather than subscribing to what the common like belief is in society. You can determine how much you want to let culture have an impact on how you feel.
Yeah, and perhaps there's a default amount that will have an effect on you, but given time, you can reevaluate those things and try and come up with your own moral compass.
Yeah,
based on, I guess, maybe your own conscience would be what it's based on. But related to the patriotism discussion, I've thought about this in relationship to like when the wars kind of started in Ukraine, and Russia started a war, and I was looking into things, and like China, I think China are building up like a pretty fucking fat army, and China obviously have their collectivist values, but they're very like they encourage people to join the military a lot, and they encourage like patriotism, and obviously they have like the fucking I forget what they call them, but basically concentration camps for Muslims.
yeah, the Uyghurs.
Sorry,
I think it's pronounced like the Uyghurs or the Yugis.
yeah. Yeah, so they're taking extreme measures to preserve their cultural traditions.
Yeah,
which is kind of the opposite to the Western world. I feel like to a large degree we criticize the traditions of culture, and you know, whilst that's got some validity to it, obviously, we see. I think that lack of patriotism makes us a weaker country, because I don't think most people would be willing to fight for their country, like in England, for example. And I don't even know for myself if I believe in the values of the country, whether I'd be willing to fight for it. And I think compared to Eastern countries, somewhere like China, like I don't know, they encourage that patriotism in their people, which gives them strength.
yeah.
And, like, people will die for their country, whereas I don't know whether people will be quite as willing to die for the values of Western cultures, as such a large thing. Western cultures now is criticizing the values of the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to determine like, how much an individual in China purely wants to fight for the country, or is kind of forced.
Over their force,
Like you said,
yeah.
they're encouraged to fight for their country from a young age, or is it kind of more so, are they programmed to think a certain way?
Is it indoctrination, really?
Yeah, yeah, but it just comes back to the individual v the collectivist way of thinking, like trying to sacrifice the individual freedom to maintain that protection and security for the whole country.
Yeah.
Whereas England and other Western countries tolerate other people's ideas and beliefs so they can have freedom.
Yeah. I
guess you could argue that like, the UK is like, because we're an island, we have no borders with another country. Like obviously there's overseas, we have no direct land borders with other countries, so we're not really under a threat as easily as China. Like China have got, well, they've got like Korea, South Korea, North Korea next to them. They've got the Kashmir province, which Pakistan and India are fighting over, and China. So they've got another, like they've kind of got a battle on every single side of their country that they could be fighting or could be facing like in the future. So they have to be prepared. But are they only kind of at threat of war due to the way they behave? Like, is it kind of almost a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Um,
Like they're trying to expand the
well, that
military presence.
China are kind of starting wars basically, or they're getting.
Yeah, like they're expanding their military presence, and then
Yeah,
that makes
well, I
other
think it's
countries.
us. Yeah, it's definitely. Well, I would say I'll preface this by saying I don't know that much about the nuances of China's military strategy at the moment or whatever, but um, I think they are. It does seem as if they're working towards, like they absolutely are aiming towards being like the most dominant country in the world, if they aren't already. Like, and like other than the military strategy, they're like um, they're helping. Like people say, because back in the day, sort of America and I guess the Western world gave all their manufacturing over to China, and those sort of jobs, like they're cheap, looking for cheap labor. Well,
Yeah,
like China are now doing that with Africa in some ways, and I think there are
yeah,
many countries in Africa which China have sort of done that with. But at the same time, you look at those countries, and they've helped those countries massively. They built so much infrastructure there. Um, and I watched this video that it described it as like modern day like colonization of the countries. But
hmm
but I don't know. It seems as if like yeah they've put their mark there, and because they've helped them out so much, those countries definitely owe them, and they definitely have power there now.
yeah,
But they've also helped them a lot, and maybe it's a one-sided argument to say that it's colonization and that is wrong because they're helping them, whereas maybe the Western countries aren't really doing that so much.
yeah. A big, that is a difficult one because I remember ages ago hearing about it. I think someone was on a podcast talking about it. They were saying, I think like China are pouring. I think it's probably worldwide. Maybe it might have been just in Africa or possibly worldwide. China pour like more concrete every year than the US has in its history. Like they're just building and building, and like they loan out. They give massive loans to these like countries and different businesses in
Oh
these
right,
countries,
yeah. Is that what
and
they're doing?
then
It's a loan system, so yeah,
yeah,
that gives them the power over them, like
yeah,
financially.
and then
So
I think the loans might end up just being so ridiculous that they won't be able to pay it back, so that China just take control over the whole operation.
right, okay, yeah.
So it's something like that, and like it might be a bit like cynical, but I would argue it's possibly better that these countries are kind of left to do it themselves. They might be at a slower pace, and it kind of might not save as many lives as fast if there's better infrastructure faster through China. But giving control over to a like external country just doesn't work in my eyes.
Yeah.
Like even if it was like America or England, like we shouldn't have like no a country should be solely run by itself
Mhm.
in my eyes anyway.
Yeah, and I guess we did kind of like we briefly mentioned the British Empire, like basically everywhere in the British Empire has reclaimed itself as an independent country now, because it was like one third of the fucking world or something like that.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see because obviously China are a very powerful country now, and they're probably only getting more powerful, particularly with like that emphasis on technology and stuff. Um, like with and like something like TikTok, fucking everyone has TikToks as well, especially young people, and like China have all that data because the Chinese company that owns it, because China's like this kind of hybrid, where it's capitalist and communist. I
hmm
I think I think all businesses or something are like at least are owned by the state, so the state
yeah,
have access to all the information that people are getting from TikTok, and obviously they're building the algorithms in the way they want to influence people. Um,
yeah. It's a very much state-controlled private businesses, and they steal. This what's it called again? Like intellectual property theft is like a huge thing with Chinese companies.
mhm.
They just steal all this data through like the likes of TikTok. Apparently, if you have TikTok on your phone, it can access like your computer and other like devices, possibly like on your Wi-Fi. And if you've got like a parent who's on some like software company that's trying to build some new app or something. Chinese businesses can take that and make it themselves faster because they've just stolen all the research and development.
Mhm.
I did listen to I think it was Modern Wisdom. Chris had this guy on called Peter Jean or something, Peter Zain, something along those lines. And he's like a geopolitical analyst, and he was saying China's obviously making all these advancements to kind of be the dominant country in the world, but if they were to kind of go to war over Taiwan with like the US or something, the supply chains that China runs on are like very fragile. Like I think they get like a lot of their energy. I don't know if it's natural gas or oil, I can't remember, but they get it from other countries. And if they were kind of to oppose the Western world, the UK and the US would be able to kind of cut that supply chain off, and China would just be fucked. Like they wouldn't be able to have any energy. People in their country would just be starved, and there'd be famines and all this shit. So like, they are kind of a force to be reckoned with, China, because they're taking control of the world, but they're still in danger themselves. So I don't know how far they're going to take it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who knows? I guess only time will tell. But definitely a very powerful country, and it seems as if they have ambitions to be even more powerful. So
yeah,
we'll see how that
especially like in the cyber world.
Yeah, maybe we'll keep our criticisms of China to the minimum just in case.
Yeah, maybe. Probably listening right now.
Yeah, if I can probably.
Yeah.
I mean, they probably have some shares in Zoom. Like, there's a big tech company in China which has like shares in a lot of the social media stuff. So think that one company, I forget what it's called, but it has like they're the ones that will be funneling everything to the government.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what's like a question I would ask is, what big traditions does China have? Like in the UK, we have the monarchy as kind of like one of the main traditions, like societal traditions. What would you argue China could have? Like I think they have Chinese New Year, obviously that's like a celebration.
Yeah,
I guess that's a tradition at the same time, but
I don't know. I don't know a lot about like Chinese culture like that, but I think a large part of it is it's like encouragement of the political system first of all, and the history of China. Like they'll try and hold that in high regard, because that
yeah,
it comes back to patriotism. So that will encourage patriotism for the country, which means, I guess, people will fight for it. But it would actually be I'd be interested to know like whether the typical Chinese person, like what they actually think about like this individual versus collectivist values conversation, whether they actually do believe that the collective is more important than the individual, which I guess there's certainly an argument for. And if you're raised in that sort of culture, and perhaps like obviously China is thriving and becoming more powerful, you see that your country is thriving and becoming more powerful based upon these values, and you think, okay, then yeah, there's sort of proof is in the pudding type thing.
yeah. I mean, I remember my sister lived there for 3 years, and like one thing that I kind of like sussed out from her stories about it is like the big thing in China is like family. Like the family stay quite close knit throughout all of their lives, and like, it's quite common. I think due to like a financial reason, but like the parents end up moving in with the children when they retire or something, so they can like look after each other almost. And they all like every time they have a meal, compared to like in the UK, if you get a takeaway, everyone kind of gets their own main and a side possibly. Whereas in like China, it's all about sharing. Like everyone gets all at the table, order different plates and different dishes, and they're all kept in the middle. And then you have your own individual plate, and you kind of just share all the different pieces together, which is quite nice.
Yeah,
and it's like that collectivist way of thinking. Obviously, it expands to the whole country, but it kind of minimizes itself down to like the family unit and like the nuclear family and like maybe the friends, which is nice in a sense.
Yeah, to be fair, when I get a Chinese takeaway at home, we always just get it and put it in the middle of the table and then take what you want.
That's fair play.
So
That's good.
yeah, I guess. But yeah, I think it's a good point that in the Western world, this idea of the individual being the important thing, it does maybe somewhat take away from the family structure, which is so valuable, obviously. But yeah, in the Western world, we have certainly sacrificed that sort of close family, with people, like people move out in their late teens and 20s generally, and then start their own family, and it's somewhat disconnected from the larger family, at least more so than in Eastern cultures. And I guess we don't know what effect, or maybe we do know, but there is going to be an effect on whether how the children are raised, and or maybe just the well-being of the people involved. Perhaps our well-being would be better if we did prioritize that family structure more than being an individual and just taking on your own life. But yeah, there's a discussion to be had about that one, and it comes back to this tension between the collectivist and individual values, which I think just talking about it there, it's made me kind of realize maybe we've made it out in previous episodes like it's an either or thing, when in reality I guess it's a spectrum of how much you value each thing, rather than it being black and white. You either have individual values or collectivist values. But I guess at a certain point, it's useful to compare it in that way when comparing different cultures, where you could maybe take the average and compare them.
Yeah, I mean, it's always come back to like you can subscribe to these ideologies, but that in itself is dogmatic. Even if you subscribe to like liberalism, which is quite a pragmatic way of thinking, subscribing to liberalism and applying that to every single situation is very dogmatic in itself. And I think it was Gad Saad that I heard say like he doesn't describe himself as left or right. He just looks at whatever situation's being proposed and decides based on the facts that he knows and like what's happening in that situation. He's not going to chain himself to a conservative way of thinking or like a socialist way of thinking. So you can be individualistic about work maybe, and then collectivist about your family.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think maybe everyone should try and be like that, and not have their opinions based on their political party, but based upon sort of comparing each situation individually. Because I think you do see a lot of people, they don't really have opinions on things. They just follow the opinions of the party they're in favour of. And there's those videos of like some guy going up to people on the street and saying, "Oh, listen to this Trump quote," and then he reads out the Trump quote, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, this is terrible. I don't know how he could say it." And then the guy's like, "Oh yeah, this was actually an Obama quote, not a Trump quote." And it just kind of clearly shows that people, their opinions are not based on,
they're not even their opinions,
considerations of the argument.
Way of thinking. Yeah, they're just programmed. They let themselves become programmed to a party or an ideology, and forget that they have the ability to do what they want based on what they think. But yeah, it's a bit sad. Obviously, it's not that sad because people still able to live happy lives. But I mean, I'll probably fall into that trap as well of kind of going in with progressive ideas on certain things and then maybe conservative ideas on certain things. But
I guess as a human, it's inherently difficult to overcome your biases like that when we're inherently biased. And it is interesting thinking about, because obviously you want to consider the individual issues for yourself, and this sort of leads us into one of the other ideas I had for a topic for this podcast. But because people's personalities affect their political beliefs a lot. And I was thinking about this, and I sort of thought, like, how much impact should an individual's temperament have on how much does it have, or how much should it have on the values they end up having. Yeah. Any thoughts on that, on how personality should impact that, or does impact that?
I don't know too much about it, but I remember I think Jordan Peterson talking about how he always gets labelled like a conservative, neo-Nazi, or whatever you want to call it. But he was like, his temperament is very agreeable, it's very conscientious, so naturally he would be placed in like the liberal, or like the
Yeah.
like
Well, the
more
best,
so like as a liberal.
the best predictor of like political belief, the best predictors are from the big five personality traits are openness and conscientiousness. So liberals will have high openness and low conscientiousness, and conservatives will have high conscientiousness and low openness. But those two traits vary
Right.
independently. So there's going to be people with low both or high both, and obviously it becomes a bit less clear whether they'll what political opinions they'll end up having. They'll probably end up having maybe more nuanced opinions on, like as we were saying, on individual subjects. But yeah, it does make you think how much of what you believe is kind of deterministic based on your temperament versus how much you actually have the choice to come up with. And we talk about coming up with your own values based on your own consciousness, but your own consciousness, I guess, based on your own conscience, sorry. But your own conscience will be impacted by your personality. So like whether you believe something is right or wrong and what you choose to value will be based on your personality. Yeah.
So I guess could you end up like screening every single like young person, and then like on a good average being able to determine which is going to be a conservative, which is going to be a liberal. But then what about like, isn't there a saying that people kind of become more conservative the older they get?
Yeah. I think I'm not sure if that's a direct impact of the personality or not, but I think people go up in conscientiousness as age goes on, so maybe that's an impact. But I think it's kind of a natural thing developmentally. Like when you're younger, you're more open because you've had less time, and like you're more potential than you are like actuality. So as you grow up, you actualize who you are more, which perhaps leads more to conservatism and less of like a lower openness. And yeah, maybe I don't know. I guess that's speculation. But
Yeah. No, it's interesting though. What was I going to say? Yeah, but talking about that, like, I guess personality is kind of, I don't know if it's immutable. Like, does it like evolve over time as you get older, or like you were saying, if people become more conservative as they get older, is that because they kind of generate more wealth and have more net worth as they get older? They own a building, or they own like a small business. So is it kind of situational based and like environmentally impacted? And I kind of like that brings me on to the next point of like you were talking. You said that you watched the Woodstock festival recently, and how a lot of people there would not necessarily act the way they would on a day-to-day basis as they did at the festival. But like they really enjoyed it and found true meaning in it. If you want to like, elaborate on that.
yeah, so this Woodstock festival, I'll give a bit of background on it. So the original one happened in 1969, and there was this super like hippie kind of place, and everyone who went there said it was like it was amazing. It was like just felt like just like so much love in the air and that sort of thing. And then, but it was just a one-off thing. But they decided to do another one in 1999. But basically, there are a lot of factors going into it. But they had, there was basically kind of shit infrastructure. Like it was really hard to get water from the taps. The toilets were absolutely fucked. everything was ridiculously expensive. So these people kind of, I guess, built up a resentment to the festival, to the organizers as time went on, and there was litter everywhere, and it was just not a well, like the infrastructure was just shit pretty much, and it wasn't well or organized or managed. And along with that, like a lot of the music acts were like heavy kind of rock music, which is very aggressive. So it felt like it kind of brought out that side to people, and it basically just turned into an absolute shit show. For some reason, like on the last day of it, they were expecting like a big act at the end to be announced that people. Like there was loads of rumors going around with these massive artists. They were saying, "Oh yeah, they're going to be like they're going to perform last," but basically, they decided at the end of the Sunday, when everyone was angry and pissed off at everything that had happened, to hand out candles to everyone in the crowd. So they had like, it was a big festival. It was like 250,000 people, but I think they were handing out like 100,000 candles or some shit. And like obviously these angry people, we would have kind of had like a weekend which was a bit of a shit show, like start setting fire to everything, and then it's just fires everywhere. No big act gets announced at the end, so they're just like, fuck this, and they just like, it's just like some apocalyptic shit. They're tearing down like the big fucking towers with speakers on it, and they're looting everywhere. They're breaking into ATM machines. Just an absolute shit show, really. But basically, it made me think about how people kind of abandon, like people wouldn't do that usually. And yeah, and they kind of
you can't get
that based on the situation. So I guess that's sort of what you the link you were suggesting there, that given a certain situation, people just values change or maybe go out the window or when they have the opportunities, which maybe parallels the effect that as you make more money over time, you become more conservative because it suits you more economically, which I guess that's maybe one factor that accounts for it.
But what would you argue kind of, I was going to say, what would you argue is better? Is it kind of better to stick to the values that you had when you were young and trying to live those throughout your whole life, or I guess is that too dogmatic?
I think it's good to evolve your values over time.
Even if those values kind of could, like, let's say you're a young political activist and you take quite like collective and selfless beliefs, is it kind of all right to kind of abandon those for more selfish and self-serving like policies in the future as you get older? Like, let's say you care a lot about the environment as a young person and you want like businesses to kind of do the right thing and create a more circular economy, reduce waste, but then as you get older you end up starting your own business, and all these like regulations on recycling and the way you like handle like disposal of waste create more stress and like cost your business more money. Is it better to
I
don't know.
I feel like the question is kind of it's about, okay, whether the values are right, whether it's right or wrong to change your values as you get older. But I think that would just come down to the values that you choose. But because it's a question of values, it's a philosophical argument that you can't make absolute arguments about. So is it right or wrong that they change their values? Well, obviously in their opinion it's going to be right, because why else would they change their values? But from an outside perspective of someone with the opposite values, then yeah, they'll say it's wrong. But I do think people generally people generally get better values over time. Maybe that's an optimistic way of looking at it, but I think as they gain more experience and understanding of the world, then the reason they dispense with those old values is because they're wrong. or they see something flawed in them. But I guess there's nothing stopping them from taking on an even more flawed set of values if the situation suits it, or for whatever reason. So yeah, it's a difficult argument, but I do think over time people become better people, and I think this is reflected in like how personality changes over time, because over time people become more conscientious, more agreeable, and less neurotic. Source Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. I mean, we could go and talk about Woodstock again. How you kind of came up with the question: what are people willing to do when there are no consequences for their actions? And then following up on that, you said that like a lot of people reported in the documentary that they found like that dystopian apocalypse of a festival. That they found that as one of the most exciting times and possibly like a truly meaningful experience that they loved.
Mm-hmm. Well,
like, does that kind of get back? Sorry, go on.
Yeah, well, with the first part, it it um it reminds me of how how there's Nietzsche's idea that the reason people are moral is not because they're good people, but because they're afraid of the consequences. So when there are no consequences, people might do things that they would never even deem themselves capable of because they thought they were a good person, when really they just followed the rules because they were scared of the consequences. So that relates to sort of realizing your own capacity for destruction and evil, and that's something we spoke a lot about in the last episode. And wait, sorry, could you repeat the rest of what you said?
You said that a lot of people report that they found that experience is like one of the most exciting times and possibly like a truly meaningful time.
Yeah, it's yeah, it does make me think, because basically on the documentary about it, there are people, they basically showed this absolute shit show, and then they had a few people that they were interviewing for the documentary who were there, and they were like, "Oh, did you enjoy it, or would you go again?" Even after they just told the story of how it was an absolute shit show, and they were like, "Yeah, it was the most exciting time of my life," or something. Or it's like one of the best weekends of my life, or something. And yeah, it does make you think that, as I guess there's some different moving parts to it. So perhaps people find pleasure in chaos and freedom, with no responsibility. Like it's a dangerous thing, but it's a very like impulsive and fun thing. But like you see, perhaps that's kind of this kind of hedonism taken to the extreme. Like you see the consequences of that in Woodstock. It like complete freedom, no responsibility leads to destruction. So I guess maybe that demonstrates in the short term it could be that fun, but in the long term, it will ultimately lead to destruction. And I think the other thing it perhaps speaks to is how a lot of people don't have sort of a higher purpose in their life, that the ultimate thing for them is having like a really fun weekend where they can just go around doing whatever the fuck they want, and it's exciting and chaotic. Like that's the ultimate, that's the pinnacle that they reach in their lives. But I definitely think there's more to be had through I guess the ideas of self-actualization and shit that we've talked about in different episodes, but maybe mostly in the Nietzsche episodes, talking about the higher man and the Übermensch. About how that self-actualization is the ultimate thing that gives you meaning, but how most people won't reach that, and the most fulfillment they'll ever feel is simply in hedonism. But that's
meaningless
but
pleasure.
that's maybe just because they haven't experienced anything better. But yeah, what do you think about
that? It was interesting how you talked about like the chaos of it all kind of led to all this destruction. I remember like when I was researching Nietzsche, he said, no, obviously we can probably both agree that destruction is like a bad thing for the individual and possibly the wider community. But I know Nietzsche kind of talks about how to like the act of creation requires force and creative destruction. you need to destroy something in order to be able to create something new and to kind of advance forward. And like you have to do that by force, like with like physical force or kind of I don't know, emotion, maybe that's like physiological or psychological force. So like I feel like the destruction kind of viewing that as just a bad thing. I'm not saying you were, but viewing that as just a bad thing is maybe wrong. Like we need to realise creative destruction is a part of like advancing ourselves forward. And maybe there was like for the individuals involved in that situation, maybe there was like almost like a creative destruction on like their way of thinking, and it kind of gave them more freedom. Because like you were saying, how some people, I mean, not meaningless lives, but they kind of live for the weekend or whatever. But they when they were in that riot of Woodstock, they'd had complete control of what they did, rather than having a boss tell them what to do, and like, from this time to that time and all this. Like taking back complete control gave them the ability to cause this destruction, and maybe it could have maybe inspired some of them to kind of realize that they want to do things their way, and maybe they took control over their lives more on a day-to-day basis due to that experience in Woodstock.
Yeah, I do. I do think, I don't know whether I think this because it's convenient for me, but I do think like having fun sometimes does like change your perspective on things. Like I say this shit about how like pursuing hedonism isn't the ultimate value, but there are times in my life, like if I've been to a festival or been on holiday, like that's what you're there for, to have the best possible time. And like those experiences are very valuable to me. And like I leave those places and I don't know, I feel like in some ways it does change my perspective in a positive way. Back to the, like you brought up like the creative destruction part, and but I think creative destruction is like it's sacrifice for the sake of improvement. You need to be willing to lose what you currently have for the sake of the higher level of creativity, or establishing a new order from the chaos that you've created after destroying the previous order that you didn't think was worth it. But I think something like Woodstock, where these people are out of control, rather than it being destruction for the sake of progression, it seems to me that it's destruction for the sake of destruction and hedonism, which is quite a different thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe it speaks to like we've evolved from like for millions of years, and like a large chunk of our evolution was being tribes, as like what's the word, like just having tribal being part of the tribe was like a huge part of like our like evolution and biology, and it's something that's very, very human, because it's all like because of what we've evolved from. It's very human in my eyes to have this tribal mentality, subscribe to the tribe and what we do, but also to have the freedom to go out and cause destruction without any consequence. Like you could go with your pals when we were like apes and whatever, and you could see another tribe that's nearby, and you could just go and have a fight to the death with them, and that was something that like was necessary to happen so that you could survive. And Woodstock, you could argue, is like a very very like pacified like version of that almost. So that's why people kind of found it so like meaningful and like truly like human.
Yeah, I guess there is something to be said for that, but I struggle to, like when I look at it, I struggle to look past the fact that I think it was complete freedom with no responsibility, so like ultimate impulsiveness, but that just leads to complete destruction, and as you play that out over time. So it's optimizing for the short term, not the long term. Yeah, people need that fucking that freedom. Like what you said there, we're gonna do an episode on Fight Club, because I think there's a lot of relevant ideas in there. but one of the things there is like you were saying, how people live their lives and maybe they feel subservient to their bosses, and like having that sort of opportunity just to basically say a fuck you to the world and just do whatever you want is a powerful thing. And I think like there's a similar theme in Fight Club where people where like there's an underlying thing of like the narrator to start with is just a consumer who lives in an office job, and he's very subservient, submissive type of person, and he breaks out of that and is able to see like his capacity for destruction and his capacity for like the power he actually has and his agency over his own being, and yeah, but it's perhaps like it links to the idea of Carl Jung's idea about the shadow, about the parts of ourselves that we keep like bottled up and repressed, and to let them go is, or to reveal them and integrate them into your character is a positive thing. But perhaps an intermediate step there has to be, you have to, like in revealing them, you maybe have to go you have to be willing to go too far with it in order to actually like let go of that repression. And then once you've let go of that repression, then you can integrate them into your character. But that's a theme I think we can have a way more in-depth discussion about when we do the full episode on Fight Club. So we mentioned Fight Club there. I think we'll do the next episode about Fight Club. That'll be probably within the next week, I reckon. And yeah,
we'll send over each other's schedule for the week, what it usually look like, and we'll find a time to try and do it each week at a time.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a pleasure. Been a good episode. Thanks everyone for listening. And we'll see you
thank you for listening. Yeah, enjoy the evenings. It's 18:49 now, so have a good evening if you're going out. If not, get to bed early.
Nice. Right. Adios.
Adios, amigo. Bye.
See.